I tried to use the side door. To order, please rise for the flag. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. This meeting is in compliance with the Open Public Meeting Law and has been duly advertised in the newspaper as an official meeting. I don't need a motion, right? It's just roll call.
Dr. Osmond? Here. Mr. Walsh? Here. Mr. McCarron? Here. Mrs. Rivera?
Present.
Mrs. Barocas?
Present.
Mrs. Gardella?
Present.
Mrs. Cass?
Present. I need a motion for approval of the agenda.
Second.
Discussion.
With the addition that I'm about to read. So maybe I should read the addition to the agenda.
Okay, there's an addition to the agenda.
And this is going to replace finance number 1. Whereas in the proposed fiscal year 2026 state budget, certain districts have the opportunity to apply to the Commissioner of Education to increase expenditures, including an allocation of tax levy incentive aid in order to satisfy the thoroughness and efficiency standards established pursuant to NJSA 18A:7F-46. And whereas the Jackson School District is below local fair share and spending below adequacy to be eligible to participate in this program, and whereas the Jackson School District is eligible to increase expenditures by up to $32,473,000 and $687 to qualify for tax levy incentive aid in the amount of up to $1 million, and whereas the Jackson School Board of Education hereby declines to submit an application to increase the tax levy beyond that which was already approved by the Board of Education at our preliminary budget meeting, because the board does not wish to tax its already overtaxed constituents. Now therefore be it resolved that the board hereby declines to submit an application to the state because this board has taken all reasonable steps to provide a thorough and efficient education to its students with no help from the Department of Education and a funding formula that has irreparably harmed the Jackson School District. And be it finally resolved that a copy of this resolution shall be sent to our local legislators, the New Jersey School Boards Association, the Commissioner of Education, and Governor Murphy. Yeah, so that's going to be the, now we're going to vote. So now we're going to vote to approve the agenda with that addition on there, and then ultimately we'll vote on that resolution separately. So now we're just voting to approve the agenda with the addition of that resolution.
Okay, so this is just the agenda, so discussion on the agenda. Roll call.
Dr. Osmond?
Yes.
Mr. Walsh?
Yes.
Mr. McCarron?
Yes.
Mrs. Rivera?
Yes.
Mrs. Barocas?
Yes.
Mrs. Gardella? Yes. Mrs. Cass?
Yes. Superintendent's report.
As this is a special meeting this evening for this tax incentive decision by the board, I have no report. Ms. Cass, so I'll turn it right back to you.
I need a motion to open public forum.
Second.
Please sign in and state your name and whether or not you are a Jackson resident. Each person is allowed a maximum of 3 minutes to speak. No person may speak more than once on the topic until all others have been heard. Seeing no one come forward, I need a motion to close public forum.
Second.
I need a motion to move finance. Second. Discussion. I'm sure there's a lot. Discussion?
Yeah, I have a discussion. I think that, Jackson's been taxed in a lot of different ways, right? Monetarily, we had a 9.9 tax increase last year. Our community was taxed through reconsolidation and reconfiguration. And through that time, I don't personally feel that the state has come forward. Like, if this resolution said something like they were going to help us with some of our expenses, right, that are out of our control, they're state mandates, then maybe we could say, yeah, okay, we'll meet you somewhere on that, but we're not, it's not written that way. It's basically to say, we'll bring you up to adequacy. Well, guess what? We could raise our taxes up that much, and we have expenses that aren't going to maintain us, you know, if we do that. And I think that's the missing piece here, that for some reason, you know, there's a lot of legislators that are around, and there's only maybe one or two who are paying attention to that fact. And all these legislators, our tax dollars are paying for their salaries, including everybody who's auditing all of our financials over the past 2 years, right? We're all paying for that service. And here we are talking about the same thing. We could raise our taxes. I thought this was a kind of like a joke. I just want someone to pay attention to us. I didn't realize you could only go as high as your adequacy number. I would have said 300%. You know why? Because this idea of raising taxes is nonsense. And in Jackson, we need someone to come in and say, where's the legislative pieces that are going to help us with all of the expenses that are, again, out of our control? It's, you know, no one can control that. These are state mandates that we have to pay, and we can raise our tax levy every year. And there's actually a great video that I found that talks about this for districts who have very high state mandates in MLL, in special education, and in transportation. If it's exceeding a certain dollar amount, going up to adequacy is not going to solve your problem in sustainability. So, you know, I'm glad that we made that resolution and that we weren't just silent about not raising a tax levy at all. You know, we need to say something. I don't know if this is my board comment or what, but this is my discussion.
Anyone else?
Adequacy. I've seen the numbers and where they come from, and they make no sense. They use the evaluation of your salaries, the average salary, but they use years 22, 23, and 24. And they also multiply it in there by the value of your homes, but they use year 20, 21, and 22. The years don't match. I don't know where the state's coming up with this adequacy, okay? I think somebody should look into how they formulated this adequacy.
Okay, I'll go next. So when I heard about this potential tax increase, I thought it was bananas and kind of lost my mind. And so although I know the people on the board very much know my position here, and I'm glad that they did agree and said we're not doing this, I did put thoughts down when I was trying to figure this all out and looking at the map. And so that the public understands where I'm coming from, I'm going to read my thoughts to you. All right, so in my opinion, we couldn't accept the proposed tax levy incentive program. We must also reject any tax increase that's higher than the tentative budget our community already expects from us. Our job as board members, being people who were voted in by our community, is to protect Jackson citizens and defend our rights to make local decisions without state interference. So to me, the idea of another tax increase after the previous 9.9% increase that the state called this one-time deal is unacceptable. And yes, I get that this is a new round of taxes, but this breaks the public's trust. I mean, it broke my own trust, right? And I'm on the board, and it goes against responsible local control. So I think we need to remember why the cap exists in the first place. And, you know, I asked this question to people on this board, and I'm glad I understand it, but the tax cap was created to stop school board members, just regular people like ourselves, from, you know, putting too much of a tax burden on the community, right? I'm not a finance person, so I don't feel comfortable even doing that. It's a safety measure against financial irresponsibility, and it gives the taxpayers some idea of stability. So our current problem is that the state just doesn't share the money fairly that we do contribute. So in my opinion, the previous 9.9% increase has already kind of hurt our credibility, and any more increases, especially numbers in the upper 20% range, will really come across like we don't care about our community, that the people who trusted in us, why did they trust in us? And I don't feel comfortable doing that. So I'll say it again for the people in the back. The real problem is the state's unfair funding formula, and it's wrong. And again, as a BOE member, I believe, in my opinion, we need to reject any temporary fixes and false promises, and that's exactly what this is. So the tax levy incentive program, to me, is a clear attempt to hide the state's failure with short-term, unsustainable measures, and what I would argue are false incentives. We can't keep relying on land sales and one-time bailouts. It doesn't work. We are a district where our transportation expenses are just going to keep going up, and up, right? That the makeup of our community is changing, and there are laws, and people have rights to get certain funds. And, until they fix that, we're never going to, you'll make adequacy for a minute, and the next minute you're not going to be making adequacy again. So to me, these are just very short-term, false promise kinds of proposals. So again, we're elected to make decisions that are in our community's best interests, and I'm very proud of our board right now for standing up for this, because it's a short-term Band-Aid fix, and the state really needs to think, how are they going to help us sustain long-term, understanding, as our superintendent has said till she's blue in the face, that we are a unique district. We have a unique population of people who live in this town. Our needs are not the same as every other town, and it's like we keep saying it to everyone that we could say it to, and they're not getting it. So to just keep raising dollars and then no, it's not really helping, just doesn't seem right to me.
So, having much time to look at everything that's been put on the table, I came up the other day, I thought to myself, this would be a great question on the SAT. In 2010, it was signed into law a 2% tax cap. Plus, in 2018, it was signed into law S2 funding that would cut your school funding. And then add into that the variable of increasing non-public transportation, increasing multi-language learners, increasing special education, and add to that inflation, and then get to adequacy. Riddle me that.
Hello? Okay. I was just going to say, listen, I remember this at the convention in Atlantic City, and I remember it on TV. I remember the governor and the commissioner both claiming and actually boasting that all districts were fully funded. Does everybody remember that? They were fully funded. I don't know how we're here now, because Lacey, Toms River, Asbury Park, Middletown, us, I don't know, if everybody was fully funded, why would they have to raise their taxes to bring themselves to adequacy? As Ali pointed out, listen, we have a rising, non-public population, we have a rising MLL population, and we have a rising special needs population. Those populations create substantial state-mandated budget expenses. So when your non-public budget expenses supersede your public funding, you're never going to get to adequacy. You're going to keep falling behind. And that's what's happening. So unless they change this formula, and we're just going to keep falling. The other side is they wanted us to raise your taxes for the mistakes that they made, but then go back to the 2% when our non-public increases more than 2% annually. So again, we could raise your taxes, hurt your pocketbook, but you'd be back here. It doesn't matter, because all those expenses are going to keep increasing, and we're going to be in the same place. We're never going to get ahead. It's just frustrating, I have to tell you, like, we've all been really stressed. We all really respect each other up here, we have different opinions. We don't always agree on everything. I think on this, we sort of came together. It's hard. I know that everybody thinks that we sit up here and we just, I don't know, make these decisions willy-nilly, or, we've been told we've ruined the town. We've been told a multitude of things. We get emails, we get dirty looks, we get all kinds of things. It's not easy. And I mean, everybody was emotional in executive session. I'm always emotional, so here I go again. But look, this has been hard. I don't see a lot of people putting their name on the ballot. We're who you elected, and we're doing the best. We all have vested interests. We all live in this town. All of our kids are either currently in this school or have recently graduated. So when we make these decisions, we don't make them lightly. So it's really frustrating sometimes to get those emails or to get those looks, to be treated less than because you didn't agree. But again, you don't see all the things that we see. You don't see every spreadsheet we see. You don't see that we approved a budget and 9 days later, the state comes in and says, oh, guess what? We got this incentive for you. You can raise your taxes 28% to bring yourself to adequacy, and we'll give you $1 million if you do it. Yeah, there's a little bonus if we raise your taxes 28%. So all I'm trying to say is you don't all see what we see, every little micro piece that we see. We give as much to you in the public as we can, and we try really hard. But you need to understand that. So anyway, the last thing I want to say is that our students are not only Jackson students, but they're New Jersey students. And so I feel like our governor and our commissioner need to recognize us as students of this state, not students of this town.
And I think that we need people to realize, like, this decision is not going to make it easier for us, right? We're taking a stand, hoping that the state's going to listen. So we need to get together, okay? And we need to start to make a little noise instead of at one another to the people who can actually make a change. And, that's why we did this. To be honest, like, I have a 10-year-old accessing the schools. Like, I want them to have a good, them to have a good education. Like, part of me sees the value of being able to have the money, right? But it's the purpose that it's not going to solve the problem. No one is looking at the problem and saying, hey, we recognize this and we want to help you, so that you're not taking from one pocket to put into another pocket, or, you're taking and then it's only going to sustain you 1 year. But recognize that this is going to be hard for us. This decision was one to stand up, and then we're hoping that everybody else stands up too. We have a lot of staff members that should be standing up every day, and parents. And, again, when I heard this, I said, man, they're giving us carte blanche. This sounds like a joke, right? I just want someone to pay attention. No one's going to pay attention if we just said nothing, right? But look at our audience. I mean, we're more people up here that are required to be here than not. I hope there's a lot of people listening, but you have to stand up and say what's right. And that's what we have to do. Middletown did that, and they got laws right now going to benefit them. Yeah, they got Channel 7 News. California knows about them. They're in a position we were in probably 3 or 4 years ago, right? Raising a tax levy a little bit at that point would have helped us, right? We went out for a vote for 4%. We're well beyond that, and no one is paying attention. So you guys are.
We've actually asked, I know Mrs. Pormilli has asked, I don't know how many times, the commissioner to come. We've invited him. We've invited the governor. We've invited the commissioner. The commissioner actually hides from her at meetings, just so you know. He kind of, right? Kind of doesn't want to really pay attention to us. We've actually had Carol, Mrs. Morris's boss, came. She came and looked. She saw. She looked at everything. Crickets. Nobody wants to address Jackson. We don't know why. We know that there's a big problem. We just stated all of our problems. We didn't create them. The state took away our funding. We have extra budget expenses that are not our problem. They're not our fault. They're state mandated issues that we're required to pay. And so.
And we're already paying income tax. If we weren't paying income tax, I would easily do this. You understand that, right? But we're paying a ton in income tax and we're not getting any of it back. We're only, no. Income tax goes for state funding. Our state funding is 15%, 75% locally funded. They want us to raise it another 28%, which puts them down to 5% state funding. And according to our legislator, who likes to give us a lot of numbers, we're paying $75 million in income tax out of Jackson, New Jersey, and we are realizing, what, 20 million of it? I mean, you know, in the end, if we got 35 more, we would still be able to give other districts that are looking for money. You know
1,000%. I've been saying this for so long, right? So you're paying 70 million, you're getting about 22 million back. And yes, I know you have to send, you send it to the state. The state gets to allocate it as they see. There are some things that they have to do, right? You have other districts in need that don't have a tax base that get some of that money, right? But you're the ones paying it and you're not even up to adequacy, right? That's crazy to me. That's insane.
Yeah, but what did we say before? So they're giving you $1 million incentive if you do this tax program. 300 districts, did we say, are doing it? So that's are eligible. So if they all apply, do the math. So you can't give us any money, but you're going to give everybody $1 million all throughout the state if they raise their taxes. So think about that. They want us to raise your tax that they've already taxed you. They took your money. Newark's had parties. Like, we all know what's going on. So they're going to give all these districts $1 million incentive. And we're asking for, how much have we asked for? Seriously. And they can't help us out ever. We get no. But other districts obviously get what they want.
And I think everybody has to understand, listen, I ran down our district organizational chart, right? I put everybody through the ringer and I said, who are we cutting, right? Listen, we've cut. The fact is we're cut. We're still 75 or whatever, 100 students. It's still a lot of kids. It's very easy to say, cut that person. What's it saving you? We are very behind the 8 ball, and believe me, I just went down every single possible position. The board could sit here and tell you, I compared us to Brick Township, right? They got 1,000 more students than us, and their organizational chart is very non-transparent. They don't list out how many supervisors they have. They just say academic supervisors. Well, guess what, folks? That could be 1 or it could be 10. Right? We list out everybody, so we look like we have more. We are down to the bottom. The people now need to get up and say something. This board's been saying something. We've tried our best to say something, and we can't say anything, right? I thought it would be a joke again. I'm going to say it again, a joke to say I'll go up to 300%, right? Someone will pay attention. What's Jackson doing? Stand up. You're just a few here in the room, but, maybe you got neighbors and you could go rally them together, but someone's got to say something.
One of the things that is a little bit mind-boggling is that you would think you would learn from, things that have happened in the past. And so we just happen to be the neighbor where things aren't great in the public schools, right? But we're not allowed to speak about anyone else. So we're not even learning the lessons from what happened somewhere else. And the state doesn't look at what happened somewhere else and said, how could we make this right? How could we look at income tax? How can we allocate a little bit more fairly? It's really mind-boggling. It's almost like the state is completely against us and doesn't want us to be able to dig out of this hole. And you wonder why, right? Because there's enough money. In my opinion, there is enough money that they are collecting throughout New Jersey to take care of all of their school districts. And it's like you're watching the destruction of public education how long can that go on? It's not, it's not just Jackson who's having challenges. There's just so many schools that are under adequacy, and the state is literally doing nothing. And I think people really have to, as Megan said, like stand up, think about things, be an informed voter, and you really have to, make a change next time you go to those voting booths, because this is ridiculous. This is truly bananas.
Roll call.
Dr. Osmond?
Voting on the resolution?
We never voted. We had a
On the
discussion.
resolution, that we're not, the resolution
So
marked red.
if I vote yes, I'm saying we're not doing anything, we're just sending that in, then I am voting yes.
Mr. Walsh? Yes. Mr. McCarron?
Yes.
Mrs. Rivera?
Yes.
Mrs. Barocas?
Yes.
Mrs. Gardella?
Yes.
Mrs. Cass?
Yes. Any other board comments? I think we've given you a lot of information. I need a motion to adjourn.
Motion.
All in favor, or by acclamation?